The date is April 13th, 2002. There is no visible moon in the sky over eastern Michigan. The temperature, a crisp 55 degrees outside of the Pontiac Silverdome. The EA Sports Supercross series has found itself inside of the Silverdome for round 13 of 16. By this point in the series, a championship that was contentious and dramatic has now returned to a normal trend. Pontiac looked to just be another step in Ricky Carmichael's title run. But things are about to get weird. And right in the middle of one of the least parodic eras in Supercross history, perhaps the greatest Supercross race ever is about to occur.
I'm telling you, this has been the greatest race of the year.
It's gonna get better.
So I don't know about you, but a great Supercross race has to have at least a few key elements to make it special. Of course, there has to be a good battle for the win. It always helps if there's championship drama. It has to be unpredictable, like no clue who is going to win unpredictable. Multiple leaders, or at least multiple people who are battling for the lead. And let's face it, a good crash always adds to the story, as long as nobody gets hurt. I can think of several Supercross races over the years that match at least some of this criteria, but some of the best races would happen quite early in the season and mean very little towards championship implications. The 1986 season opener at Anaheim was an epic duel between David Bailey and Rick Johnson, but nobody knew what it meant for the championship at the time. The 1990 Atlanta Supercross could be the closest thing I've seen to matching this race in all aforementioned categories, but I still think Pontiac was better. And of course, there are plenty of 125/250F class races that have been amazing. But it's not the premier class, and over time those races seem to get lost in memory. So on a strictly premier class focus, I'm going to tell you why the 2002 Pontiac Supercross was the greatest Supercross race ever. To understand this race, you first have to understand the 2002 Supercross season. A year after Ricky Carmichael won his first Supercross title on a Kawasaki, he shocked the industry by jumping to Honda. The greatest Supercross rider of all time, Jeremy McGrath, was looking to recover from a year where he was flat out crushed. It was only the second time in 9 years that McGrath did not win the title. 2002 was supposed to be another McGrath versus Carmichael showdown. However, the points leader for a majority of the season was this guy. How could this happen? How could David Vuillemin assert himself ahead of two guys that were untouchable a year prior? Oh, right. Because Ricky started the year by doing this.
Bruce coming up, sticks perfect.
Ricky Carmichael goes down! Larocco, it looked like Larocco might have run over that right foot.
He had nowhere to go. He was totally committed.
Meanwhile, McGrath had an atrocious problem with arm pump for much of the first half of the season. Ricky somehow managed to not miss a round despite breaking a bone in his hand, but it was still enough for Vuillemin to win 3 of the first 6 races and pull out to a commanding 35-point lead early. Ricky won rounds 4, 5, 7, and 8 to close the gap down to 20 points by midseason. Then Vuillemin, while doing a photo shoot with Transworld Motocross prior to Daytona, did this. Vuillemin dislocated his shoulder and missed Daytona. Carmichael won Daytona and the next 3 races, pulling a 20-point deficit out to a 20-point lead entering Pontiac. Vuillemin needed a miracle to get back into the title chase. A miracle that Pontiac was set to provide. I've watched this race probably 100 times, but I can't tell you any one thing that made this race great. There were several little reasons, but I'll get into that in a moment. First of all, here's our little game board for all 20 riders who lined up for the main event that night. Over the course of this race, we're going to eliminate people from this board who are not going to win. This field is strange because it might feature the least perennial superstars out of any truly great race I've ever seen. I mean, look at this. Here's a list of the career Supercross victories prior to this race, organized in the order they were in the championship. Of course, Carmichael and McGrath stick out big time. Lusk was great in the late 90s but hadn't won a race since 1999. Villeman was still nursing a shoulder injury despite racing. And Huffman and Tortelli are just mixed in with some rather random wins in 1997 and 98 respectively. Our board features only 2 Supercross champions, but it does feature 8 different 125 Supercross champions. This board could potentially look way better if it wasn't for Kevin Windham, Mike LaRocco, and Travis Pastrana all getting injured during the 2002 campaign. All 3 riders were battling for wins early in the season. Heck, LaRocco even won Anaheim too. But none of them are on the line for Pontiac. So you know the backstory, but what exactly is the fuss about this race? Hold on, I'm getting there. I just want to show you one last thing. For centuries, any good book and eventually any good movie followed a very similar plot line to make it exciting. It was a standard progression of rising actions that built up to one climax in the story. It's a nice model. It builds suspense. Pontiac 2002 was more like riding a roller coaster. This is a look at how interesting things were on each lap of the race, ranked from the most interesting to the least. That's the great thing about sports. On occasion, they can truly be better than anything scripted for entertainment. I mean, look at these fans. They paid for a seat up front that night, and there was absolutely no need to use those seats during the main event. What a waste of money. So this race starts about as normal as any race during this era. Seriously, it doesn't get much more normal than Kyle Lewis grabbing the whole shot in the main event.
Well, it looked like Kyle Lewis might have got the Powerade hole shot.
Lewis was like a hole shot king before Mike Alessi came around. So Lewis snags the whole shot from an outside gate, but is quickly shuffled to second down the first rhythm section. And this is where the true hero of this race comes out to shine. Ernesto Fonseca made this race the greatest race of all time. Fonseca will lead the most laps in this race, but, spoiler alert, he doesn't win this race. Let's cross out Fonseca. Also, let's cross out the bottom of this list as well, given that all of these guys are buried in the pack right from the start. There we go. So these 6 guys, we know, will not win this race. And I still have to work this thing down to 1? End of lap 1. Carmichael already on Fonseca for the lead. Heath Voss is in dead last, so let's eliminate him. The second lap of this race, in my opinion, is the most crucial lap that actually made this race possible. Fonseca, who is Carmichael's teammate, defends. He could let Ricky go, given the championship Honda is trying to win, but he doesn't and leads across the line on to lap 3. Then, in the blink of an eye,
Just about every factory Honda rider. Oh, Ricky!
Carmichael was famous for massive crashes, most of the time because he never gave up on saving a crash from happening. He held onto this one for so long. It's a miracle he's not hurt as he remounts right behind Heath Voss, but in front of Ben Riddle, P19. So given that Ricky is buried in the pack with all these guys we already know are not going to win, his bars are bent, and his helmet visor is limiting half of his vision, Carmichael has now been crossed out as a potential winner. This is the miracle Villeman needed, but he's still hurt. And with Carmichael crashing heavily and literally the whole field flying by knowing he's had a big crash, you can practically see everyone else's eyes lighting up with the potential for a victory. Fonseca is now leading Tortelli, Lusk, Villeman, and McGrath inside of the top 6, whom we all know have won a race before. The other guy nestled in P4 early on? Nathan Ramsey. So factory Honda is still looking fairly decent for the victory here, but they would need either Fonseca or Ramsey to pick up their first career wins, or Tortelli, who had been hurt for most of the year, to somehow last for 20 laps. Boy, I sure do miss factory teams having 4 riders. Anyway, Fonseca leads for another few laps before Tortelli starts giving him fits. Things are only getting weirder. Tortelli looked as though he landed with his foot on the back brake on lap 6, causing him to go down. He remounts several positions down, thus eliminating him from contention. 2 corners later, Ramsey loses the front end and McGrath gets stuck behind him. They both only lose a couple places, so we'll keep them eligible to win for now. Lusk is beginning to close in. The bigger threat to Fonseca, however, is in third, as Villemin is starting to latch onto Lusk. He's gonna do it. He's gonna make a couple passes, and he's gonna win the race.
Fonseca, oh, Villemin goes down!
Or not. Villemin plays nice here. Kudos to him. If he hadn't laid it down there, Lusk would have gotten a femur full of Yamaha. Instead, Villemin goes down. And although he remounts fairly quickly, the momentum he had is gone, his shoulder is likely hurting, and we now know he will not win this race either. Lusk is so close. It's been almost 3 years since Lusk has won a main event, and he's tired of waiting. Finally, on the 9th lap of the race, we have the first actual pass for the lead.
Looks like Fonseca's tired. Lusk goes for the triple. Lusk cuts in front of Fonseca. Fonseca comes right back.
Didn't last long, but Lusk is still right there. It's getting more and more ridiculous, but we're not even halfway through the race when the TV broadcast finally picks up on something. Davey Coombs, the now editor-in-chief of RacerX Illustrated and owner of MX Sports, was the pit reporter at the time, and he is really good at paying attention. Maybe the crowd realized it all along, but it took until lap 9 for Davey Coombs to say this.
I can't believe this, but the fastest rider on the track right now is number 4. I just watched Chad Watts' pit board. Carmichael's worked his way up to about 8th spot, is riding a second and a half faster than Fonseca and Lusk right now. Don't count Carmichael out of this race.
6 laps. 6 laps. It took Ricky Carmichael 6 laps to go from 19th to 8th in a Supercross main event with his visor in his face. I guess Davey is right though. We have to count Carmichael as still having the potential to win. But that doesn't mean he will win. These guys up front are riding great. Here we are on lap 10. Third most important lap of the race is coming, and we still haven't reached the true craziest moment of this race just yet. Lusk has been hounding Fonseca for 5 laps, and the dam finally cracks open.
Everybody out front, Lusk!
Lusk, number 11 of the Kawasaki. Here comes Ferry, number 15 on the 4-stroke Yamaha. He moves into second.
Lusk shoots to the lead. Ferry shoots by for second. Fonseca held on for 9 grueling laps. I'm going to show you this chart now, not as a spoiler, because there's still more craziness coming, but to highlight why Fonseca made this race great. For 9 laps as the leader, Fonseca's biggest lead was just a little better than a second and a half after Ricky crashed on lap 3. The other 8 laps, his lead was no bigger than 1 second. He was riding great, but he was doing something much more crucial to make the race interesting. He was holding up the train. So you think here that Lusk just takes the lead and runs, right? That's what the uptrend in this graph is?
Lusk having trouble. Ferry takes over the lead.
So 0 passes for the lead for almost 9 laps quickly turns into 3 different leaders before the 10th lap is complete. Where the hell did Tim Ferry come from? Hold up. Yep. That's Tim Ferry in his tugboat YZ426 coming through the whoops on the first lap in 15th place. This is almost more ridiculous than Carmichael's charge forward, and he's leading the main. The next 5 laps turns into the Carmichael show. Villemin thought things were going so well. Ricky crashed, DV was battling for the lead. Next thing you know, Carmichael is passing him for 6th on the 13th lap of the race. 10 laps after Carmichael was eating Michigan soil at 30 miles an hour. He's actually gaining points towards the championship again. Guess what happens next?
But I've not seen
Oh, Lusk goes flying!
Oh, poor Ezra. You know, he led this race on 2 separate occasions and never once led a lap. I told you this race was weird. So Lusk is out, and hey, let's eliminate some of these other guys who we really haven't seen the whole race. Next up, Carmichael passes his teammate Fonseca in almost the exact spot he got him for the lead 12 laps prior. Ferry is still leading as we hit lap 17. Carmichael has come so far, but it really looks like he won't win this race. McGrath put up a good fight for a few laps to hang on to 3rd, but now it's time for the real tipping point of this race. There are some really iconic photos of McGrath and Carmichael together. There's this one from 2001. This one from 2005 is maybe the most memorable. I really have no idea how nobody got a decent photo of this moment, but I want you to watch this moment very, very carefully. Something happens in this exact moment between these two that pretty much puts this race on the we'll never see this again list.
And look at that! Ricky Carmichael taking another chance bar to bar. They look at each other.
Did you see it? No? No, not the iconic moment where McGrath looks over at Carmichael, and Ricky still can't seem to rip a tear off with his visor in the way. No. I'm talking about something else. So, you didn't see it. Well, the whole stadium did because they're going nuts. Here, take a look.
Carmichael moves on McGrath into third.
And Ferry went down. That's the leader.
Oh, Timmy. Not you too, Timmy. I mean, Steve Mathis just took his shirt off. Yep, you guessed it. Tim Ferry coughs up a sure win and becomes the 7th different rider who had a legitimate shot at winning to crash. Suddenly, Nathan Ramsey is just thrust into the biggest lead anyone has had all night, and he has to try to hold off this unbelievable charge from Carmichael. It's down to just the two of them. What makes this race really weird to me is Carmichael was damn near hated at this point of the season. He plowed Travis Pastrana for the lead at Indy, and the fans never seemed to forgive him. But everyone was on their feet for him as he tried to reel in Ramsey in the last 3 laps. He tried, but this race wasn't meant to be another notch in the pole for Carmichael. Nathan Ramsey took his first career Supercross victory by a margin of 1.7 seconds. He would only lead 4 laps. But you see, this race ended up being so much more about Carmichael than anyone else. Carmichael had come back in a season that looked so bleak. He crashed his brains out again, and he still prevailed. Even for me, this is the moment Ricky Carmichael should be remembered for. 19th to 2nd in about 15 laps? Sure, he had some luck, but you try riding with bent handlebars and only half your vision on a rutted Supercross track. Oh yeah, and about that wins list of everyone who started that main event, well, Ramsey got to put his name on the winners list. But here's a list of the amount of wins each of these guys would win after this race. That's Pontiac 2002. And that's how Supercross is weird.